Hey, man, before we jump into this most excellent episode, I want to tell you about something that's really exciting to me. I'm a published author, and my first book is out. It's called The Guy's Guide to Pocket Knives, and this is a great little book all about the pocket knife. It's really written from a nostalgic kind of perspective. I talk a lot about the history of the pocket knife. I go through the different types of blades that have come about over the years, and even the transition from our granddad's pocket knives with the multi-blades, sort of the case, folders, slip joints, to the tactical folders that we see around today, and even talk about a number of whittling projects and how-tos. So this makes a great gift for anybody who's looking to get a pocket knife or is around that age where they're getting their first knife, or just guys in general, because it's just a great little book. Go check it out, wolfandiron.com/pocket knife book. Over there, you'll find more information about the book and how to pick up a copy for yourself. All right, on with the show.
Duty, honor, country dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals.
Now we are the masters of our fate.
Howdy, gents. Welcome back to another episode of the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm your host, Mike Yarbrough, founder and curator of wolfandiron.com, and I'm glad you're here. So I've got to ask this question. What comes to mind when I say the word millennial? Most likely it's not something positive. I mean, you aren't thinking about this creative generation that loves to go out and socialize with other people. What about Gen Z? I mean, most of you may not have even heard about Generation Z because we haven't found any really good memes to post about them yet, and it's not as fun to say as millennial. But my guest today is going to enlighten us on the subject of millennials and Generation Z. And I think it's so important because these are our kids. These are our sons and daughters. And these are, like it or not, these are the future leaders of our nation, of our businesses. And they have some incredible strengths, but they also need our help to help them experience the things that you and I experienced growing up. I'm a Gen X guy. Even if you're older, if you're a baby boomer, it doesn't really matter. They need the help experiencing some of the values that we have. But in order to do that, we've got to connect with these guys, and we've got to really respect the things that make them unique. And the conversation today with Dr. Tim Elmore, of all people, is going to be so critical to help you guys do that. He's got this book out called Marching Off the Map. And guys, we need a map. We need a map that goes beyond our scope. And then we've got to march beyond that. And so we're going to talk about his book. We're going to talk about what Generation Z is compared to millennials, where that cutoff is. But we're also going to talk about what their strengths and weaknesses are. You guys are going to get so much out of this conversation. You guys can check out all the show notes and links over to Dr. Tim Elmore's site for growing leaders and his book by heading over to wolfandiron.com/Tim Elmore. And without further ado, here's my guest, Dr. Tim Elmore. Dr. Tim Elmore, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the Wolf and Iron podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Mike. Great to be with you.
Well, I wanted to start off by just telling you how I found out about you. And it's also kind of gets into why I'm so interested in this whole topic of Generation Z, millennials, and that sort of stuff. So my 18-year-old just went off to college. He's at Anderson University down in South Carolina. But while he was getting we're kind of filling the college out, they had a couple of parents things that they took us through. And one of those, one of the administrators there really focused on a slide that was filled with all kinds of information from maybe from some of your earlier either blog posts or a book or something along those lines. And it was all about Generation Z, and it just hit the nail on the head. And I just thought, I got to get this guy on the podcast because other men need to know this kind of stuff. And so I'm really honored to have you here. And it's great to see that your message is getting out there, especially to the educators, but it's even making its way, obviously out into the world of the dads and the moms and everybody else who needs to hear this kind of stuff as well.
Well, it's all of us, Mike, I think. And that's not to say that everybody needs me, but we are keeping our ear to the ground because change is happening so rapidly. Mm-hmm. And you're right, very easily. It's easy for us as parents, especially, just to hold on for dear life to what we had in the past and just replicate what happened in 1977 or 87 or 97. And we're just in a world, it sounds cliche, but we're in a world that's changing now every 3 to 4 years. There's measurable change. And kids communicate, listen to music, et cetera, differently about every few years. And if we don't keep up, it not only means we're not hip, which may matter, may not matter, but
Right.
it also means we're not going to connect with them the way we could.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely right. And I see that. And there's nothing wrong with the parents encouraging their kids to go off to college. But I think we need to be aware of some changes that are happening both in the educational realms, but also just in the overall attitude and the personality and everything that's come along with these new generations. And it's happening faster and in greater details, or just the expanse of changes is much greater than what it was, previous generations. So,
Yes.
I think guys are going to get a lot from this conversation. Before we jump too deep into talking about your book that's come out and this topic of Generation Z and Millennials, help me understand a little bit better what makes the difference between a millennial, because we kind of lump them in together when we're talking about the Generation Z and the Millennials, and where does that cut off, and how do we know the difference between one or the other?
Okay, so Generation Z would be the population of young people behind the Millennials. They're the youngest population being measured today that we can get any real data on. I mean, you can measure a 2-year-old, but you're not going to learn anything, that's permanent. So the Millennials are now all young adults to midlife. They're in their 20s and 30s. Generation Z, depending on what social scientists you read after, started either at the late 90s or right at the turn of the century. And I believe a great marker to in our brains to think rightly about them is right about the turn of the century, Generation Z began, following Generation Y, which followed Generation X.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this. They really don't remember a day without terrorism, because their generation started about September 11th to, about that same time.
Right.
In fact, one historian calls them the Homelanders, because their generation started at about the same time as the Department of Homeland Security.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Most kids today don't remember a day without social media, because that's what they've grown up with the last 12 to 15 years. Think about this. This just baffled me when I first read it. The average high school student today learns about September 11th terrorist attacks as a piece of history.
Wow.
Like
That's crazy.
JFK's assassination.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
It is. They've most likely never used an iPod. They don't need adults to get information. Well, that's just weird, because, you and I both, we needed grown-ups around because they knew and we didn't. Well, now, thank you, Google, they don't need us for information, But I argue they do need us for interpretation. Let me help you make sense of all that you know.
Yeah,
Let me give
good.
context to all the content. Yeah. So I'll stop there. But Generation Z would be the youngest population, and they are different because they're growing up in a very different world today than we did when we were growing up.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And, you talk about September 11th. I think that's one of the things that hits me the most when we talk about the difference between the generation Gen Z, maybe even some of the Millennials, but Gen Z and my generation, your generation, anybody else that was already around. Because when 9/11 happens, when the anniversary comes about, I really want my kids to get it, right? And I really long for them to get it in the same way that I did. But it would be almost like, well, they're not going to, because it's always been a reality. It'd be kind of like us trying to get excited about the fact that we revolve around the sun, or something. We grow up knowing those things. It's not really a big deal. That just has always been. But for you and I and other people who are around, that was such a shocking event. And you're right. It's hard to imagine that there's a generation that only knows a world where terrorism exists. And it's a sad thing as well, because they don't know the world where you're just, the 80s being pro-America, loving your country and flags flying and, peace and good times and all that. Wow.
Well, no, you're exactly right. And because information globally is everywhere, this is just a nugget that just blows my mind every single time I think about it. The average teenager today endures the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient did in the 1950s.
Wow.
So I think we're just not aware that kids are growing up with so much data coming at them, thanks to social media, that they're just in angst and sometimes depression. As teenagers, we're going, what the heck's wrong with you? Let's go, and they're just consumed and sometimes overwhelmed by everything going on around them that they know at age 11, Yeah. So we've got to maybe rethink how we're doing the fatherhood thing or the teacher thing or the coach thing as we lead kids.
That's really good. I'm actually jotting down some notes here because I want to make sure we hit on some of these things. I've got my mind's going all over the place because there's so many questions I want to ask here. But I'll try to stay in line here. Let me kick off with a little bit with your book here because I think this is really, really good. And I know it's kind of geared towards educators, but it doesn't matter because anybody who reads this book is going to get something out of it. It's called Marching Off the Map, which is just an excellent title, by the way. And give us that paints a picture in and of itself, but give us an idea of why it's called Marching Off the Map and how that kind of frames this discussion about thinking about these new generations in ways we haven't before.
Yeah. Well, I actually got the title from Alexander the Great. Remember reading about that guy in history class? Mm-hmm. Alexander the Great lived centuries ago and was this conqueror who put together 3 armies and marched across the known world, conquering every bit of territory he came into. But he didn't stop there. He ended up marching into unknown territory. He marched off the current maps that they had, and he was known to frustrate some of his soldiers because he turned them into map makers. They were literally mapping as they marched into the unknown territory. Yeah. Well, doesn't that paint a picture? Yeah. This is the day we're in. We're mapping as we march. We're figuring this out as we raise these kids. And I often say, it's kind of cliche, but I often say this, my own parents could not teach me how to raise a child with a portable device in their hand. They never raised a child with a portable device in their hand. So, my wife and I are kind of making this up as we go. So I'm just trying to, in this book, help a parent, teacher, coach, educator, whatever, really understand and then lead well this young person that's next to them that we're just baffled at, and we tend to want to get mad rather than getting busy.
Yeah. And I think resources like yours, the Growing Leaders Group, the book that you've got out, all the blogs and the podcasts that you've been on and those kinds of things, and other guys that are in the sphere as well, are so critical because, even my generation, Gen X, most of us didn't grow up raising a thing, really. I mean, some of us may have had some dogs if we were lucky, but there's a whole generation out there that didn't raise anything, plants, nothing. And now we're being, we've got the challenge of raising children, which is wholly new to us and unexperienced. But now we're also raising children in an environment that's happening so quickly. And, we got to ask those questions of like, what do we lock down? What do we give them access to? How do we allow them to be themselves, express themselves, but also keep them away from danger? And and then you bring in anxiety. We've got ADD. We've got, so many other issues going on. We've got to get some knowledge on this, and we've got to be serious about it because this is not the old days where as long as the kids grow up healthy and happy and they've got, grandkids on the way and that kind of stuff, then everything is good. Kids can go down a bad path very quickly and they won't even know it until, it's too late a lot of times. So this is absolutely critical. What are some of the strengths that that this Generation Z really comes with? I mean, just sort of innately almost to them because of growing up in the time in which they grow up.
Yeah, well, Generation Z does bring lots of strengths with them, just like you said, every generation does. But think about the world they've grown up in. So the last 15 to 17 years, they would have intuition about some of the new technology that's been introduced that you and I wouldn't have because they grew up with it. We're learning it as adults, so they're very, very tech savvy, no doubt about it. About 70% of teens today want to be entrepreneurs, so that's huge. They see themselves as not just working for the man, or whatever, but I'm going to make something up. I'm going to create something, invent something. So that's kind of cool. Now, here's the downside. Because they've been exposed to so much information, they have very, very short attention spans. So in the year 2000, the average teenager had an attention span of about 12 seconds, meaning they could pay attention to something before they get diverted to something else, 12 seconds.
Sure.
Today, it's about 6 to 8 seconds. So It's almost in half. And that doesn't mean they can't pay attention longer because, listen, they'll binge watch Netflix for hours,
right?
Stranger Things or whatever. But what happens is we just don't engage them well because we do it the way we learned it. And the lecture method or whatever, just doesn't work. And we had to do that, but they're going, no, I can watch a YouTube video and it's shorter and better. And so they check out. So they bring many strengths. We're going to need to adapt, not adopt, but adapt to their world. And so we know how to connect with them and communicate with them to bring them up to be the men they need to be.
Sure. Yeah, that's really good. That attention span thing is it's sad in one sense, because you've got this generation that does want to be entrepreneurs, and you and I we know what that takes to do that. It takes some serious focus, a long-term commitment to doing things well, running into issues and overcoming them. And obviously the generations before us had that in droves in terms of character. And probably less in my generation. And then, certainly that attention span, that hardihood, that work ethic and all that kind of stuff is going to be harder for them. So, just in terms of entrepreneurship, how can my generation and other generations that have come before them, how can we support the millennials and the Gen Z guys coming up to be entrepreneurs and to do those things well? I mean, what are the gaps that we need to be filling in for them?
Yeah. Well, the first skill set we need to possess is a simple one, but it's simple to understand, hard to practice. We need to listen. For instance, the kids today are going to come up with ideas that seem zany. They just seem absurd.
Right.
But you and I both know some of those absurd ideas became realities. Mm-hmm. Who would have thought 30 years ago our phone would be everything to us? It's our GPS. It's our camera. It's, da, 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 da. You get the point.
Yeah.
So I tell you what, I've got a great example of this. When Angela Ahrendts was asked to be the CEO of Burberry Coats in London, she flew over from Indiana to London, and she turned conventional wisdom on its ear. Burberry Coats was on a decline as a brand. They were going down. They were not making the sales they had made in the past. So the first thing she decided to do was sit down with her youngest employees. I mean, like interns.
Yeah.
And she said, "What do you think we need to do to breathe life into our brand?" And they started to come up with ideas. Well, they were all really different. But one idea that came up was, let's start the art of the trench. And the art of the trench was, let's provide some pages on our website that our customers can go to and post pictures of themselves in our trench coats. Well, who doesn't want to post a selfie, on a site that's being viewed by millions? Yeah. So she goes, let's do that. So she goes to her executive team, and they end up doing it, and their brand took off. In fact, over the next few years, it began to rise to levels it had been in the past and then beyond. But here's the point that I'm trying to make. Instead of coming into Burberry, sitting down with the old people, the executives, and saying, let's come up with the ideas, then we'll tell the interns what to do, she did just the opposite. She said, interns, what do you think we should do? And then we've got the contacts and the budget. We'll implement it. So I'm just asking your listeners, would we be willing to listen to a zany idea and say, maybe, just maybe, that could work? Here's another good example. This just came to me. Way back in the 1990s, a guy named Reed Hastings lost a video that he had rented. Remember Blockbuster videos? Remember back in the day? Yep. He had rented Apollo 13, and he lost it. And when he finally found it, like weeks and weeks later, in under the seat cushion, he takes it into Blockbuster, and he knows it's going to be a huge fine.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. He's so afraid. He doesn't want to tell his wife. He's just that afraid. And it's like $170 or something,
Yeah.
And on his drive home, he's mad at himself, but he's also thinking, there's got to be a better way. Well, Reed Hastings comes up with Netflix.
Wow.
And he actually takes Netflix, this idea, to Blockbuster and says, hey, there's a better way. We could do this. And Blockbuster goes, no, that's a stupid idea. Well, guess what? Blockbuster is a thing of the past now, and Netflix is flourishing because they didn't listen to the zany idea that one day we might be streaming, and so all I'm saying to listeners, dads, teachers, we may have to listen first and not giggle or chuckle, but say, that may just work. And like my friend Andy Stanley says, instead of saying how, say wow, and go from there. Yeah, so that would be one. Secondly, I think we need to put wind in their sails by believing in some of those ideas. That may mean financially. That may mean emotionally with encouragement and affirmation. I know these are timeless skills and every believer gets this, but I just think it's important that we don't lose, especially as guys, some of those fundamental skill sets that the young need desperately. Some of your listeners, I bet, are thinking, I wish I would have had that from my dad.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yep.
But let's make sure we don't replicate another empty population because we didn't do it right with the kids. I'll stop there, but that's what I'm thinking at this point.
No, those are great examples, absolutely great examples. And, we have a tendency, I think, every older generation thinks about the younger generation, something negative, right? And I think the millennials and probably Gen Z are going to be wrapped with the stereotype of being lazy and not having it hard enough, to really teach them the lesson. So therefore they can't have valid ideas and so on. And obviously that's just nonsense. And look, guys, you're going to be working for these guys at some point.
Yeah,
they're going to, the next Steve Jobs or, whoever it is going to come out of this generation, and they're going to do it with ideas that you would have never seen coming. And so you're just going to have to understand that there's power there. And, but I think there are areas where we need to help them grow. And so laziness maybe not right, may not be the right way to think about them, but are there values that they're missing out on that you and I were brought up on, that we were taught, but there's values that these generations are missing that they desperately need if they want to be not just successful, not just have good ideas, but to really have fulfillment in life and be happy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any idea?
No doubt about it.
What those might be? Yeah,
I do. I've got a few that I'm thinking of. So when you look at the data on Generation Z, and there is nationwide data on millions, not thousands, we do know a few things. One, like you just hinted at, there is a lower level of grit. Angela Duckworth, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, has done a great book on grit, and she just says, it's pretty obvious. Our grandparents' generation had a higher level, the ones that grew up in the Great Depression, and kids today, not their fault. We raised them in a world of speed and convenience and high tech, but they would have a lower level of grit. So we may have to find ways to build that in them. It's almost like a gym, there's certain weights you got to lift to build the bicep, the tricep, the abs. So we need to say what muscles have atrophied, and then what do we need to do? What are exercises? So grit would be one. So what we did in our home with our kids, we were noticing grit was dropping a little bit, and then also emotional intelligence. They're on their screen so much on the portable device that their people skills, their social intelligence, was down. So let me tell you what we did. My wife and I would have parties that we had our adult friends come to, but we'd ask our kids to host. So at age 8 and 12, and they thought it was so stupid, they would answer the door and say, "Hi, Mr. Johnson, come on in. Would you like some iced tea? Can I take your coat? Have you met Mrs. Smith?" They learned to do those things at age 8 and 12. Yeah. And now they're both very good at those relational skills, but it's because we took them to a relational weight room. And it was not hypothetical. We didn't lecture them about, we said, let's get into things. And then afterwards, we talk about it. And, I'll never forget my 12-year-old daughter, Bethany, goes, "Yeah, Dave, Mr. Smith's emotional intelligence is really low, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is." I mean, they're critiquing the adults,
That's awesome.
But it was great to get them thinking about their thinking. So I would say for grit, we tried once a quarter to go down to a homeless outreach in Atlanta where we live. Mm-hmm. And they would serve homeless people. And I mean, it smelled bad, and they had to work hard and serve meals. And, you can just imagine. But boy, did it do two things. One, made them appreciate their middle-class home that they got to live in.
Exactly.
And secondly, we just grew our grit. So of doing stuff you don't really like, but yet you just stay in there until the last person has served their meal.
Yeah.
So I just want to encourage maybe listeners to be thinking, what could we do that might be something that could do that? By the way, this is going to sound terrible, but can I interrupt myself here?
No, go ahead.
On our website, we've got a very, very inexpensive, it's really cheap, but it's a disc you can insert in your computer. It's 52 leadership ideas you can use with students. Projects like that. In fact, those projects are in it.
That's great.
Whether it's people skills or character or vision or you name it, it gives you little exercises, not just lectures you can do to begin to build that. So if that's helpful, they may want to go to that It's called 52 Leadership Ideas. Yeah,
that's great. And
So-
we'll have a link to that as well on the website. I think that's absolutely great. And what I'm hearing from you as well is that I want guys to get this. You've got to be purposeful about this stuff.
Yeah,
This isn't,
that's right.
they're not coming up in the same society that some of us did. I was raised by my grandparents, so I got a little bit of an older school kind of teaching experience, but even the kids that grew up that were my peers didn't really grow up with the same influence that I had. And if we're not purposeful about it, our kids are not going to get it. They're not going to get it from school. They're probably not even going to get it from church necessarily. The social programs and the kind of world in which we grew up in that sort of gave these things to them, just grit, and discipline and relationship skills, they don't exist without being purposeful. So guys, I'm talking to dads out here, you've got to be serious about this kind of stuff and you've got to make it a priority. So I think that's absolutely great. The 52 leadership lessons, I think that's fantastic. So we'll definitely link out to that. Let me ask a question about, I don't know if this is in the book or not. I haven't gotten this far into it yet, but what does this generation or the Gen Zs, maybe even the Millennials as well, how do they think about the bigger, like esoteric things like God, death, those kinds of immortality? Is it as real to them as it was to us? And even for us, it's not as real as it used to be for, the generations past. But how do they think about those things?
Okay, so one clear thought has emerged from California to New York. This is nationwide. Generation Z by and large, likes to think of themselves as spiritual, but not religious. So they differ in this way. Organized religion is less appealing to them, going to a church service or that sort of thing to find God or to get close to God. Even though many could still go to a quote unquote youth group, they would say, it seems antiquated. It seems irrelevant, and maybe our generation.
Yeah, no, am I a Gen Z?
Yeah.
I'm starting to feel like one.
yeah, exactly. So, but they do think there is a spiritual world, and I don't want to miss that. It's FOMO, fear of missing out. So they don't want to miss out on, there is a creator out there. So I do think if that matters to listeners, that you can tap into conversations about the meaning of life and about God and your creator, and they might have some very different ideas because for them, let me just add another thought here, life is a cafeteria. Let me tell you what I mean.
Yeah.
They're mixing and matching just like when you go to a cafeteria, your baked beans, mashed potatoes, and pudding, that's my meal.
Right.
I think they're making almost every major decision in their life as if it were one large buffet, including the God question. So a little bit of Buddha, a little bit of Jesus, a little bit of Oprah, and I've made up my faith, So, and that's just kind of what you see almost everywhere you look. That's kind of how life is now. It's mixing and matching and customizing. So there may not be one linear path, A to B to C. And if you like that, you may have to help them uncover that. But that's what we're finding in terms of the spirituality of Gen Z.
Well, do you find that they enjoy reasoning through these kinds of questions, though? I mean, like if somebody approached them about God, would they rather sit down and talk about it from a logical, philosophical, kind of rational point of view, or or does that not even resonate with them?
Yeah. I think it differs based on personality more. I don't know if it's generational.
Okay.
I think there's probably people in every generation that love to philosophize and talk. And then there's others that go, where's my video game? That sort of thing. Right. But I do believe if we provide an experience, like I just suggested, then have a dialogue, they'll engage. But the experience has to come first. So our organization partners with a number of Division I athletic departments, Alabama, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, and a number of pro teams. Many of these pro teams are going to this experience first, dialogues second, rather than lecture.
Yeah.
And now what do you think about it? So we may have to change our lesson plan, our pedagogy, and say, let's provide an experience or have an experience like a trip that we took together. Then let's talk. That's what I think really resonates with them.
Okay, that makes sense. That's good. One of the things, I'm trying to transition here. I'm not doing it very gracefully though. One of the things that you mentioned, and I'm terrible at transitions sometimes. One of the things that you mentioned a few times in your book, and I've seen it on the website as well, and it seems to be, I don't want to say it's a buzzword, but it seems like every year there's a word that just catches me, and I see it all over the place, and I'm like, okay, something's happening here, and it's mindfulness. And I think it's such a good thing to practice. I'm trying to work on it myself. I'm telling my kids about it. Yeah. Give us an idea of what mindfulness is and kind of how that applies to these generations. Probably the same for everybody, but what do you mean by when we talk about mindfulness?
Mindfulness is definitely a term that's taking the psychological world by storm. We live in a day, first of all, that's full of multitasking. We are addicted to things and screens and programs and apps, and so we're multitasking all the time. Mindfulness is really about monotasking. I'm focusing on one thing. Okay. I'm thinking about my breathing, for instance. That would be one way.
Sure.
And so I've got an Apple Watch, and I stop and breathe. And that's not that I'm not breathing the rest of the day, but I'm thinking, let me just focus now on what I'm doing right now. And even though this sounds maybe zany to a listener perhaps, so this Zen or whatever, it's just so helpful to clear the distractions and the clutter and the noise that's all around us and just focus our minds. And I think our kids need this because their attention span is 6 seconds.
Yeah.
But to be mindful, even for a moment, for a minute, is so calming and brings poise back to us and clarity back to us. So yeah, it's a huge thing that I think we're going to need to first practice and then introduce to our kids and our sons and our students and our athletes.
No, that's great. And that, yeah, absolutely. It's not just for that generation. You're right. It's for everybody, because we're all addicted to not all, but so many of us are addicted to our cell phones. It's just part of our life. We pull it out without even thinking about it. I'll tell you, when I realized that my smartphone had gotten too involved in my life, I'll tell a short little anecdotal story. I've always had really vivid dreams, and I've had vivid dreams about flying, that I could fly since I was a kid. Probably Superman influenced, I don't know, but either way, I had this dream that I was out at my grandparents' house. They live out in Tennessee, and I'm in Charlotte. I was out at my grandparents' house, and I realized I could fly, and I'm like, okay, well, instead of driving home, I'll just fly back to Charlotte, So I'm kind of flying along the roadways, and I think, well, this is stupid. If I can fly, I should just go in a straight line. I don't have to follow the roads. But then I realized I don't know how to go straight from my grandparents' house in Tennessee all the way back to Charlotte. I don't know what that looks like. So in my dream, I pull out my smartphone, and I'm trying to use it to, Google basically.
GPS.
GPS, give me a Google map, right? But I can't talk. I'm like, it doesn't come out right at all. I can't use my fingers. My search is not working. And I woke up just really frustrated because I realized that when I was a kid, I would have just imagined it. I wouldn't have had to have this crippled, or I wouldn't be crippled by this device here. And I've had actually a few dreams where that's happened, where I'm trying to use my device and it's just not working. And I realized that it's actually interfering with my imagination. And I'm so attached to it that I've got to have it, rather than just thinking through the process. So a little bit scary.
Yeah, it limited your brain.
It did.
To being within the confines of a smartphone. Yeah.
And I don't know. It'd be interesting to actually poll the generations, Gen Z and Millennials, and say, hey, how many dreams do you have where your smartphone is involved? And does it give you the answers that you want?
Question.
Does it give you the answers that you want, or does it just give you, random, or does it not work? So another little transition here. One of the things that I saw, this really impacted me in your book, was that we're now seeing a widespread loss of things that we so cherished and so valued in previous generations, and that is this childlike behavior and the sense of childishness. And we obviously want to grow as men and grow out of that, but to not have had it at all just seems like such a loss. And do you think that's, I know it's widespread. Is that something that we can ever recover, or do you think we're always going to be past that?
I think it's a little of both.
Okay.
I think if we're intentional as a parent, let's say, we can restore some of the childlikeness, that we want our kids to have when they're in elementary school and so forth. But here's what I suggest in the book. This is a very philosophical thought, but I think it's a great handle for readers and listeners. What I see trending today and what we're moving toward is the extinction of childlikeness and the extension of childishness.
Okay.
And here's what I mean. Because kids are so exposed so young to information on a smartphone, or, the data comes in when they're in preschool, I think like they're becoming jaded or skeptical at 8 years old. It's
right.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So that childlike wonder, that childlike innocence, that childlike trust, which I think is very valuable to have, it goes away sooner. So that's the extinction of childlikeness. But then the extension of childishness, sometimes because we never gave them a real childhood, 26 is the new 18. I mean, I've heard college deans say that to me.
Yeah.
These boys are staying boys when we need them to be men. And not all, for sure, thank God. But I've lost count of the number of university staff that have said 26 and 18. We don't really expect these guys to really be men now. Jeez. And I'm thinking, man, when I was growing up 18, you were expected to be responsible, be autonomous, let's go. Yep. And so I'm wondering if because we never gave them a childhood, are they wanting to extend it now? So maybe as a parent, practically speaking, we need to make sure that we do not completely take away all cell phones or whatever, but maybe we need to guide them, put guardrails up so that they maintain the sense of wonder and trust, perhaps through up to middle school, let's say.
Yeah.
So that they, and they still enjoy Disneyland. I don't know, they still enjoy things like that. And so it's in their system, out of their system. And when they turn 21, they're so ready to be 21. They're ready to move forward and say, thanks, Dad. I'm so ready for this moment now. That's what I'm working toward as a leader myself.
No, that's really good. And that was actually going to lead me into another question. So you've helped me transition this time.
Okay, good.
Should parents take more, what we would say, probably aggressive approaches these days, which would just basically be like, you don't get a cell phone until you're 15, 16 years old, whatever the case is. And I know parents, we homeschool, so we know a lot of parents that are, more along this lines of they don't have a TV in the house, or they have a TV, but they don't have any cable, or they don't watch Netflix or anything like that. And the kids very much grow up. Yeah. Even though they may be Gen Z, they still have grown up in more of the old school kind of our maybe generation kind of style of way of doing things. Is that a right approach, do you think? I mean, I'm sure it's per parent, they have to make their own decisions, but would you say that that's actually beneficial in some ways, or is it not beneficial because now they're going to move into a generation of, when they go off on their own,
they need it.
Right. Yeah. Where they need it.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I don't think there's one pat answer. That's what I need to start with. I think, it probably depends on the temperament of the child and where they grow up. But I will say this, intentionality is the key to talk with them and say, this is what we're deciding and this is why. I'll never forget when my son, I dated both of my kids when they were growing up, as well as my wife. I would go out once a week to Taco Bell or whatever, and we'd get a burrito and we'd talk. Yeah. And sometimes when they got old enough, I'd bring a short article and I'd say, son, read this article and then let's talk about it when we eat our taco. Well, one article I remember was about video games, and video games are really fun. But as you know, many boys are completely addicted, and sometimes they spend the equivalent of a job on a video game. Yep. So my son read it. We had a great talk, and I will never forget, at the end of that lunch, he said, Dad, I think I'm going to cut back on video games.
That's awesome.
And inside I thought, yes. But I didn't say, son, you ought to cut back on those things. It wasn't me dictating, because that doesn't go over very well. Now they're digging their heels in. When they see, this is not good. This is not good for me. Now, not every kid's going to get that, and I think you need to wait to an age where you can have that conversation. But that kind of an intentionality, I think, is so critical. We need it today. And I think just letting them do a kind of a whatever life is going to, it's going to be a crapshoot on what we get at the end. Yeah. And that's not good.
Right. Yeah. No, that's good. That's great. That answers my question really well. And I got two more questions. I'll just wrap this up here. One of them is, I'm just trying to think about how to phrase this. I have a concern for these generations, and I see them trending more towards things that are just passive and transient. You mentioned in the book that the Gen Z especially has gone from sharing stuff online and just having it sort of out there forever to really wanting to do things like Snapchat and some other stuff that basically just puts a photo out there and it just disappears, right? And when I heard, I don't like this stuff on Instagram. I do Instagram. I don't like it when somebody sends me a picture and I've only got access to it for a small period of time. But this generation is growing up like that, right? They don't, when I grew up, if there was a band that I liked, right, that band, I was going to like that band for years and years and years and follow them all through my life. My dad loved, Led Zeppelin until he died, right? But, it's just not the same for these generations. And I worry, my concern for them is that they're going to not see the value in life. They're going to capture so much life, but it's just not going to be valuable to them. And they're going to really grow up unfulfilled and just have a longing for something that they've missed out on. And I just got a real strong burden for them to really get the value of this, this one opportunity they have to live and to see other people as, these wonderful, beings that they get to share life with. Yeah. And not just as a transient thing,
Well, let me volley back real quick. Yeah. I think you bring up a great observation. We have noticed that viral posts on social media have moved to vanishing posts, like you just alluded to. Yeah. One of the reasons for that is many of these Gen Z kids have an older, brother or uncle who's maybe 25 and they're 15. Yeah. Excuse me. And they have watched that older brother or uncle post that picture of that party they went to on Friday night where they got crazy drunk, you know. Yeah. And then Monday they do a job interview and their potential employer watched and saw that post and then decided not to hire them. So the reason Snapchat has gotten big, many reasons, but one of them is I want it to go away. I want to post for sure, but I don't want my track record to follow me around because it may haunt me later. Yeah. So you can see logically why Gen Z is acting the way they are. The millennials paved the way, made the mistakes, and now they're going to reap the benefits of knowing what those mistakes were along the way. Yeah. So, but we're going to have to find ways, to your point, to help them find meaning and to stick with something for a long time, even when the glitz and glamour is gone. That's what I wanted to do with my kids. Find something you love that matters. Mm-hmm. And then let's not quit, after 2 months because I got bored. Let's stay with it. Let's finish it out. And then, at the end, if you want to do something new, you can, but finish what you start. That's a huge countercultural thought that I think we need to reinstill in kids today. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely right. Okay, well, this is my last question for you, and I didn't actually post this one on the when I sent it over to your assistant. I missed this one, so if you have to think about it for a second, that's fine. But okay, you're a man, and you've had a really big impact on the culture and in society, and you're in a really important point of discussion and thought around these next generations. And I just want to ask you, how's this impacting you as a man? One, to do what you do, but then also to see, the influence that you're having, on the generations and on teachers and parents and that kind of stuff.
Wow, that is a huge question you just asked, Mike. I would say it's very rewarding to get notes or letters or pictures from both educators, parents, as well as the kids. And both will write. It's so rewarding to know what you're doing is moving the needle. But I got to be honest with you. I think the most rewarding picture, the best way I can answer your question, when my son was 12, in fact, when both my kids turned 12, we created a rite of passage experience for them, where we really want to help them transition from boyhood to manhood or girlhood to womanhood. And America really doesn't have one of those like many cultures do. You're right, yeah. So our rite of passage year started with a trip, and I'll take just a couple minutes, and I'll just share this trip because I think it answers your question. So I told Jonathan, anywhere you want to go in the world, we're going to do a trip, a daddy-son trip. You pick it. And as soon as I said those words, I thought, oh my gosh, he could pick Hong Kong or Paris or whatever. Yeah. This would cost me thousands of dollars. Well, thankfully, he chose Minneapolis, Minnesota. And here's why. If you remember, Minneapolis, Minnesota has the Mall of America and Camp Snoopy and the roller coaster inside the mall. That's what he thought would be really cool. Wow. So I thought, we'll do it. Yeah. So we took a long weekend Friday to Monday. And the first 3 of those 4 days, we just spent having fun. I mean, we went on the roller coaster and had cotton candy and had pillow fights and did stuff we never told Mama about. It was awesome. On Monday, though, I said, now, Jonathan, on Monday, we're going to do something different. We're not going to just mess around. We're going to really talk about some important things. In fact, he was even antsy about that. Dad, what are you going to do? What are we going to do? And I said, just relax. But on Monday, we hopped in the rental car we were in, and we drove up to one of those lakes up around the Minneapolis area.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled into a parking lot right next to the water, and I stopped the car, and I said, Jonathan, I want to do something a little different right now. I remember him looking at me and go, tell me something I don't know. I said, shut up, just listen. And I said, I want to trade places with you. Well, what do you mean? Well, I want to get out of the car, and I want to go around to the passenger side and sit there, and I want you to sit behind the wheel of this car, and I want you to drive it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he panicked. He said, Dad, that's illegal. That's illegal. That's illegal. I said, Jonathan, we're not going to go out on the road.
Yeah.
We're just going to stay here in this parking lot, but I want you to get the feel of what it means to drive this car. Next thing he said, this is so funny. Next thing he said is, Dad, Mom will not like this. Mom will not like this.
That's awesome, yeah.
I said, Jonathan, we don't need to tell Mom. So it took me 10 minutes, Mike, to convince him. But I finally convinced him. We traded places. And here's this little 12-year-old kid now sitting behind the wheel of this big car. I explained the accelerator, the brake, the gear shift, the steering wheel. And he finally got up the nerve to back up and start driving. Well, he's a guy. The next thing you know, he's parallel parking, he's speeding through the parking lot, braking fast.
Yeah.
He's loving it. He's having the time of his life. In fact, when we finally stopped the car, we traded places again. I said, Jonathan, you had fun, didn't you? He said, yes, I did. I said, so stay with me now. This is going to sound kind of cheesy, but stay with me. Tell me how you felt when you first got behind the wheel of this car. And he waited a minute, and he said, well, Dad, I was panicked. I was scared to death. I didn't think I could do it. I said, what'd you just show me? I guess I showed you I could do it.
Yeah.
Exactly. I said, Jonathan, that's exactly the feeling you're going to have becoming a man.
Mm.
You're going to feel like you don't have what it takes, that you can't do it. You're the only one in the world that doesn't, somehow missed out on the cards in the deck.
Uh-huh.
And I said, John, I felt that way too. But the moment you start, you just got to do it. I said, you handled this 2-ton car as a 12-year-old kid because you had it. And I said, you also knew I was right there.
Yeah.
I said, you're also going to, God's right there with you, but you've got to do it. You've got to be a driver, not a passenger in your life. And that launched a conversation, Mike, about the next several years of his life, how his body would be changing, his view of girls would be changing, his view of his parents would likely change. But I mean, we had an incredible conversation based on that experience. And by the way, the next thing we did after we had that conversation, there was a graveyard, probably just 2 blocks away. We drove over that graveyard, and I said, Jonathan, this is going to feel really weird. But I want to get out, and in quietness, I want us just to read the tombstones of these graves.
That's
he
great.
said, Dad, that's weird. I said, I know it is.
It is weird.
But you know what we did?
It's good.
Yeah, we read those things, and afterwards I said, let's talk about what we read. Well, we read, first of all, some people had long lives. Some people had very short lives. Some people had nice things said about them. Some people not so much.
Yeah.
But I had the greatest conversation I ever had with a kid, with my own 12-year-old son, when we started talking about what his sentence would be and what my sentence would be. And I share this only because that was an experience that we still talk about to this day. And he's 25 years old.
Wow.
So I share that only as if we can ignite and be intentional about these experiences with our boys, whether they're students, athletes, or sons, we can begin to start conversations that they need to have to help them become what they need to be.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'll stop there.
No, that's great. It's absolutely fantastic. Wonderful story, very powerful. And I know men are listening to this going, I wish my dad had given me a rite of passage like that. I wish I'd had a conversation with my dad like that,
Yeah.
And, guys, you can. It doesn't matter if your kid's 18, 19 years
That's
old,
right.
25.
That's right.
I've had, we did a rite of passage for my 13-year-old, both my boys when they turned 13. And I had other guys around them just kind of sharing just tidbits about life and advice and things like that, and kind of marked it with a gift as well. But one of the guys is 40-something years old, and he said, I wish my dad had this for me.
Yeah.
You know, he's really brought to tears about it. So I'm telling you guys, it doesn't matter if your kid's 40 years old, if you have the opportunity to just tell them, you know, to have some kind of meaningful experience with them, it's gonna make the world a difference to them. Absolutely. And that's just so great that you did that and had that experience. And I want to end by pointing out one thing that you said when I asked you how this felt, you know, doing what you do. And you said that it was rewarding and, you know, that it's meaningful to you. And, you know, this generation isn't going to grow up with a lot of people touting that you should do things that are rewarding, like emotionally, spiritually rewarding and meaningful, that really just have long-lasting, meaningful impact on your life. And so, guys, we've got to point them towards that. We've got to tell them that, you know, the transient stuff that they're all about, that they get distracted with, is not the same things that are going to give them meaning and fulfillment in life. And so I just think it's so good that you pointed that out.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be more clued in on that than they are. And so, guys, you know, we've got to lead them in that way. Dr. Elmore, this has just been a fantastic conversation. I know guys are itching to hear more about this, and so I encourage you all to go out and get the book, Marching Off the Map, and we'll have links out there on the website. You can head over to wolfandiron.com/Tim Elmore, and we'll have all the links and show notes and things like that, and you can get connected with Dr. Elmore and his book. But thanks again for being on here. It's just fantastic.
Mike, it was great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it, men. I'd love to know what you thought about the episode. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media networks. And look, if you got something out of this, make sure another guy does too. Share the episode and make sure it gets in front of the guys that need to hear it the most. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.